Bibliophiles of the internet, my name is Adri and today I'm here to finally bring you my December wrap-up. Apologies for the short delay, but I had to sneak in my best of 2020 video before this and it was a lot of work as usual, but we made it, we're here, so let's do the damn thing. I did also want to say there is an updated list of helpful links in the description below, especially in light of the egregious and violent displays of white supremacy we saw last week here in the US. There are some mutual funds you can donate to who are on the front lines in DC as of filming this, and if I see any more crop up, I will include those as well. As I've said before, the work is endless, but the work continues. So with that in mind, let's start talking about the books. To begin the month, we had the Queer Lit Readathon, which I did a separate wrap-up video for, and that will be included down below if you would like to watch. In that video, I review A History of My Brief Body by Billy Ray Belcourt, One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston, Femme in Public by Alok Vaid Menon, and Fireheart Tiger by Aliette de Bodard, all fantastic books I enjoyed quite a bit. The next book I read after that was actually my Patreon pick for December, and that was The 30 Names of Night by Zain Jokadar, read by Sammy Figueredo and Lamis Isaac. It's an Own Voices queer piece of realistic fiction that blends historical and contemporary in a story about a young Syrian-American trans man whose mother was killed in a fire caused by an Islamophobic hate crime 5 years before the story begins. Now he is still in the process of mourning his mother and searching for a new name when he discovers the long-lost journals of a famous Syrian artist named Layla Z, who spent her entire life documenting and painting rare birds. With the journals in his possession, Nadir sees the opportunity to preserve his mother's legacy with this new evidence and testimony that just might complete her unfinished ornithological research. Content warnings for graphic descriptions of medical complications relating to menstruation, allusions to homophobia and racism, mentions of Islamophobic violence and hate crimes, brief descriptions of sexual assault, trauma relating to fires, as well as exploration of grief and loss of a parent. You may recognize this book from my Best of 2020 video, so you already know I loved it, but I will say here that it was absolutely fantastic and just hit me like a ton of bricks. This story is so ambitious in its scope, it contains absolutely stunning prose, deeply realized characters, and it's a story that's both haunting and hopeful in equal measures. It's such an intimate character study and a really thoughtful look at the grieving process, because when you're grieving, you're searching for meaning and connection, you're searching for a way to hold on to what you've lost, while also adjusting to the new weight of bearing that loss. And I feel like the grief Nadir is experiencing in this story is twofold, because on the one hand, he's mourning his mother, and on the other hand, he's mourning the person he always thought he was supposed to be. In that sense, the story is so spot on in the ways it describes and expresses transness and transmasculinity specifically, which obviously really hit home for me. It beautifully captures not only the sense of loneliness and placelessness that is almost inherent to transness, but it also celebrates the beauty and wonder of transition. And that goes hand in hand with the convention of naming, which is also prevalent in this story as well, because to give something a name is to give it power, to assign meaning, to recognize and understand where it belongs. So to have Nadir discovering and naming his own transness is powerful. To have him naming his grief, naming his own sense of loss and isolation from both the queer community and the Syrian community gives him a means to begin addressing those things. I also really appreciated the interaction between past and present storylines, because the book is divided into Nadir's chapters from the present and Layla's journal entries from the past, and the two feed into each other in really interesting ways. Because Nadir finds this long-buried journal, you assume that their narratives are completely separated by time, but the interplay between the two gives you a sense that history is always happening to us and contained within us. It's also a commentary on the stories the world tries to erase, the stories that don't get a chance to be told, but that still survive and hold a great deal of importance. There's so much in this story that you can unpack, and I know I haven't done justice to even a fraction of it. It's one of those stories that you can't sum up in a few sentences because it just contains so much, but I gave this one 4.5 stars and I highly recommend it. After that, at the behest of the Protection Squad, I finally picked up Tarnished Are the Stars by Rosie Thor. It's an Own Voices queer YA sci-fi story about how technology has destroyed the Earth and now humankind is trying to establish a new planet where technology is forbidden. Our main character Anna not only has an illegal clockwork heart, but she's also known as the Technician and sells medical technology on the black market. When the commissioner's son Nathaniel sets out to find and capture the Technician, he discovers the truth about a deadly epidemic devastating the townspeople and finds himself questioning his father's political stances. As we all should. to be honest. Content warnings for graphic descriptions of surgery and bleeding, scenes containing child abuse and physical assault, descriptions of violence and murder, child death and parental death, as well as explorations of grief, some exploration of degenerative illness, and instances of ableism, which are challenged on the page. This was a really exciting sci-fi adventure. It has a ragtag group of unlikely allies with a black market technician, commissioner's son, and royal assassin, which is fun. Nathaniel is also canonically Arrow Ace, and we get to see those words on the page, which is also fantastic. Really, it's just an amalgamation of tropey plot points I really enjoy. There's mystery, there's enemies to lovers sapphic romance, there's intrigue and subterfuge. It's one of those books that just flies by because there's a lot of great content. Super good banter as well, which is always a plus. And even though there's really interesting sci-fi stuff happening, it also just feels like an extremely human story that's all about discovering yourself and discovering the person you can become once you break away from whatever's holding you back. Like Nathaniel has to break away from his comfortable naivete, Eliza has to break away from her fear of weakness, and Anna has to break away from her hubris. Once they're able to challenge the things they've always known, they're able to find freedom in that evolution, and they're finally able to see the real issues they're up against. It's also just poetic to have these three people from completely different backgrounds feeding into each other's strengths and coming together to fight the good fight. It's just good stuff. I will say there is quite a condensed timeline in the story, which is good for the pace, but not necessarily for the relationship dynamics. I felt like they needed just a little more time to develop, and I think the reveals and some reactions didn't hit me quite as hard as they could have, simply because everything was happening so fast. But I still enjoyed this for what it was. I look forward to reading more from this author in the future, and I gave this one a solid 3.5 stars. Then just before Christmas, I did a little reading vlog where I read 3 queer holiday novellas. Those were I'll Be Home for Christmas by Mason Deaver, A Christmas Parranda by Andrea Beatriz Arango, and American Christmas by Adriana Herrera. That vlog will also be down below because you should watch it. It's super cute. Afterwards, I read my arc of Bedazzled by Ryan LaSala. This recently just came out on January 5th from Source Books. It's an Own Voices queer contemporary story about Raffi, who is a master crafter and cosplayer and determined to take the grand prize at the biggest cosplay convention of the year. That is until he finds out that he'll be competing against Luca, his former cosplay partner and ex. With a path to sponsorships, partnerships, and art school on the line, Raffi is forced to deal with his unresolved feelings, and he might just discover if he can actually, in fact, have both love and art. Content warnings for instances of parental neglect, explorations of mourning a breakup, mentions of being closeted and fear of coming out from a secondary character, as well as descriptions of anxiety and anxiety attacks. Bedazzled is such a good book. Honestly, only Ryan LaSala could write about interdimensional collapse at the hands of a magical drag queen, and then hard pivot into a queer contemporary story all about cosplay competitions and second chance romance. This is such a fun, bright, effervescent story that has so much heart and such a focus on character growth. I found it to be incredibly satisfying to read because it kind of gives you a little bit of everything. On the one hand, it's a very fast-paced story that's about the ins and outs of this intense cosplay competition being streamed in real time across the internet and everything that goes into that, and on the other hand, you're slowly peeling back the layers of what has made Raffi the way he is. He is very much a perfectionist, huge type 1 energy if I may be so bold. He's also extremely anxious and has this deep-seated desire to constantly prove himself no matter what the cost. There's a lot going on with the dynamic between him and his mother, who is very negligent and dismisses his crafting because she doesn't see it as real art, and I think that's definitely the source of his insecurity, even if he tries to mask it by being a workaholic and presenting himself as overly confident. But I think the story is well balanced in how it gives you room to empathize with Raffi while also showing his friends challenging him on his occasional self-centeredness and reminding him when his anxiety is an appropriate response and when it's not. I enjoyed seeing that growth in him as he recognizes that just because he himself is hurting doesn't give him a license to hurt other people, and I think by the end he's authentically growing into that self-awareness. I also really enjoyed the dynamic between Raffi and Luca, especially with the way the story is structured. It's told in alternating dual timelines where one is taking you through the whole convention weekend and the other is a series of flashbacks showing Raffi and Luca slowly but surely edging closer and closer to their breaking point. It's so satisfying to see the parallel of their relationship being rebuilt at the same time time as it's falling apart. The symmetry of that really reminds me of something like Signal to Noise or I'll Give You the Sun, which are two books that do it very successfully, even though it's extremely hard to pull off. When it's done well, as it is in this book, it really heightens the emotional stakes and drives home the character growth in a really visceral way. This story has a lot to say about how the value of what we create is not defined by how we create, and how our dreams and the relationships in our lives are also things we build ourselves. This was such a great read. I highly recommend it right alongside Reverie, and I gave it 4.5 stars. And the last book I read for the year was Legendborn by Tracy Deonn, read by Janice Abbott Pratt. It's an Own Voices contemporary fantasy story about Bree, who is still grieving after her mother was killed in a mysterious accident, and she thinks the residential program for high schoolers at UNC Chapel Hill is the perfect escape until she witnesses a magical attack her first night on campus. In doing so, she discovers this secret society on campus made up of King Arthur's descendants. Bree decides to try and infiltrate their ranks in order to find out more about their magic and see if maybe there was something more to her mother's accident than she was led to believe. Content warnings for death of a parent, exploration of grief and trauma, some magic-based manipulation, instances of racism and racist speech, descriptions of blood, graphic injury and violence, instances of assault and kidnapping, allusions to abuse, violence against slaves, and sexual assault. This is a rare contemporary fantasy that is doing so much and has so many exciting things to offer its audience. The world this story imagines is so vast and holds so many exciting possibilities, and I think that's part of why people are so strongly responding to this book. It is a little bit of a slow boil, I think, but it really hooks you with the magic system and all the secrets, and you can't help but root for Bree and hope that she finds a way to navigate all of this. As others have said, I think the story is one of the most honest looks at grief and how messy it can be, especially when the wounds are still fresh. And it talks very openly about Black mental health and the importance of seeking help when you need it, which can still be a very taboo topic in many BIPOC communities. So I appreciated that, and I appreciate how the story addresses intergenerational trauma as well, and how many young Black folks especially inherit a traumatic history riddled with death that they could never be fully prepared to face. And how that ties in with the magic system and the unique position Bree finds herself in was done in a very smart way that opens the door to so many possibilities. And I also like how the world building itself challenges whiteness and the perceived dominance of whiteness. Especially with this secret society structured around Arthurian legend, Bree finds herself surrounded by a lot of white folks whose entire system of power is dependent on unbroken bloodlines and other forms of elitism, and Bree's kind of like, what is all of this? And the more she discovers about the magic around her and possibly her own magic, the more she's able to challenge that and verbalize why she feels unwelcome in that space. And there's a really interesting parallel there with how Bree's bloodline, so to speak, is very broken, and how this secret society keeps their secret so that they can keep their power, and how other magic users had to keep their power secret so that they could survive. So there's that question of how do you come into your power when you're disconnected from your past, when it's been violently taken from you, when those who came before you didn't get a chance to tell you what they know? How do you move forward from that? Like I said, really interesting ideas and exciting possibilities. I thought the story moved at a pretty good clip as well. I will say that I love the world and the magic system, but I did not love the world building, which I found to be pretty info dumpy at times. But this was still a very strong series opener, and I gave it 4 stars. So those are all the books I read in December to finish off 2020. If you read any of these yourself, feel free to meet me in the comments down below and let me know what you think. But that's everything I had for this wrap up today. Until next time, educate yourself, be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and I'll catch you on the flip side of the page.